What's happening, Reds? It's Jamie Webster here. Just wanted to say, subscribe below. Thank you.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Liverpool Connection podcast. I'm Daz. Steve is Mr. Wilson is with me. Thank you everybody for liking and subscribing. We're about to hit the 3K subscribers, so ta very much for all of that. Today's episode, it's a bit of a serious one. We have not been playing well since the start of the season, and a lot of questions are rearing their head now, asking questions about Klopp and FSG, the financial aspect as well. And our guest today, he's a regular on Anfield Index Pro, and he knows a lot more than I do on the football finance side of things. I'm not very good at math. I'm good at speaking, but not math. And we've got a great guest today, and it's Mo Chatra. Hi, Mo.
Hi, Daz. Hi, El Presidente. Nice to meet you both.
Nice to meet you.
So, Mo, we'll just get straight into it. Not a very good start to this season, is it?
Well, you can say that again. Worst it's been since a certain Roy Hodgson was here. So that's going back 12 years. I don't think anybody, even the most pessimistic of us amongst us, would have expected it to be this poor. We all thought, okay, even if we may have not done enough business over the summer, we should almost certainly be a certainty for top four. As things stand, that's looking like a very slim chance at this moment in time.
Yeah, it's a tough watch, because the first couple of games you can kind of, play it off to just a bit of rustiness and all that, in the short pre-season. But then I think we all kept going, the next game, it'll be better and better. And it hasn't been. And it's quite shocking. And, I just read your article, basically saying, we should have invested, and with the full throttle, Genga press we've had for 4 or 5 seasons, our older players just cannot hack it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a sports scientist, so that's not my area of expertise. But what I do know as a fan is that Klopp demands of our players, an immense amount of work rates on the pitch in games. But then, from what we all understand, there's just a strenuous amount of demands in between games, during training, etc. And then you just have to look at his past at his German clubs as well, for you to be able to get a pretty decent idea that, the full throttle demands of playing under Klopp mean that, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, players burn out a little bit quicker. And it's not helped by the fact that, because we've been so successful over the last few years, we've played a huge number of games. And our players have played amongst the highest amount of minutes of any footballers in the top leagues across Europe over the last 4 or 5 years. So it's no wonder that players are starting to break down physically, are looking literal shadows of their former selves. They're human, they're not machines. And, it seems to have really caught up with a lot of them. It's more than just 1 or 2 factors, but, I've been going off on Twitter about, in my view, all of the issues that we're seeing now have their root cause in 2 factors: loyalty from Jurgen Klopp and a lack of investment, which ultimately the owners have to take responsibility for.
My also question, though, is it just FSG's fault? Because a lot of people seem to be putting at least 99.9% on the owners and not really talking about Klopp. Because for me, Klopp has to be in that room when transfers are discussed.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, and you know, there are fans who are choosing to use the current situation as an opportunity to really lay into the owners. But it isn't that simple. And you're absolutely right. You know, Klopp is very much a part of the decision-making process more now than ever before. My understanding is that when he renegotiated his contract, which he signed earlier this calendar year, as part of that, and the story goes that he extended it without an increase in pay. My understanding is that he wanted a bit more say and a bit more power when it comes to decisions around the squad. So not only in terms of who we should sign, but also who we should retain. And we, you know, by all accounts, we saw that a couple of players whose contracts were extended, you know, who create a lot of debate, stroke controversy, were the contracts for James Milner and Jordan Henderson. Now, when it comes to investment or a lack of, there are times I think where FSG have been overly cautious and perhaps too prudent. And my view is that a lot of that over the last couple of years was very much coloured by FSG's worries about the pandemic and around COVID. And they were perhaps fearful, like last season, that you know, if the UK went into further lockdowns, that we would see fans not being allowed back into stadiums. And as most fans should be aware, in the season when we had virtually no fans in the stadium or in the stadiums all season, which was in 2021, Liverpool took an £80 million hit just from match day income alone, never mind any impact there may have been on things like commercial revenue. So, you know, they were being very cautious, understandable to an extent. But in answer to your question, no, it isn't something you can pin purely on FSG. You know, there are other decision makers, Klopp being one of them, and the people that are involved in recruitment are another set of people. You know, Michael Edwards, previously Julian Ward, now is sporting director, even the chief scout, you know, Fallows, and there's another guy who's pretty prominent within the scouting department as well. So these people will have an impact, and it could be that if they're being too selective, too picky over the players that they're looking to sign, then in the end, nobody gets signed. But then FSG get the blame for that. That, oh, why haven't we signed anyone? Well, maybe it's not because the owners were being too tight and too stingy. It perhaps might have also been because, you know, the manager and or the recruitment people weren't able to hone in and successfully find someone that we were able to then get a deal done.
Steve?
Hey, Mo. Excuse me. Thank you for coming on. You know, having a master's in business, this is I love talk about the finances of the club and football in general. So thank you for coming on today. I wanted to start. You know, net spend seems always to be a key word whenever you're interacting on social media. You know, that seems to be the end all to be all for a lot of people. And my argument has always been, you know, that's, you know, just half of the story, right? Net spend also includes the ability to sell players at a premium and to get above market value for assets that are not part of the long-term solution of the club. And I think a lot of people tend to forget that part of the equation, right? They just see, we're, you know, $8 million in net spend this summer, and compare that to other clubs who have to buy because they haven't won trophies in, I don't know how long it's been since Spurs won a trophy. I think it's 30 years or whatever, right? So they need to spend money year over year to try to catch up to Liverpool. So can I break down what your thought is about how to really equate the job that FSG and the transfer committee and Jurgen Klopp do on a year over year basis?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that we know about Liverpool is They look at financials in the round. I mean, the club even is owned by people with a background in, hedge funds, and that's John W. Henry's background. And so, financially, commercially, economically, very, very smart, very astute. And obviously, he's applied a certain approach at the Boston Red Sox. He bought that club with that consortium, which is now known as FSG, 20 years ago. And they've delivered, a number of World Series championships since that time for the Red Sox. And, prior to that, they'd gone decades without winning anything. And so they've tried to apply as best they could that kind of formula to Liverpool Football Club. So, in the early days, there was very much a focus on trying to buy players at a lower value, and then developing them and potentially selling them on in the future for a higher premium price, but then reinvesting those funds to enhance the squad and ultimately build up the squad. Because when they came in, the club had been out of the Champions League for a season and was literally miles behind, the likes of United, Chelsea, Arsenal, and Manchester City was coming up as well. They'd been bought out by Abu Dhabi not long before FSG came in. So, there was a lot of competition out there for the top four places, and we weren't really looking like we were in a position to compete. But in terms of the model that had to be put in place, it was very much focused on financial stewardship, self-sustainability. So one of the things FSG were very open about is, look, we are not coming here to move to a model of deficit spending. What that means is we aren't going to be reaching into our pockets to bankroll the club. Now, I mean, that in itself, I think, is okay. But when you're in an environment where other owners are taking a very different approach, that can put you at a disadvantage. So you have to be clever. If you're only going to invest funds generated by the club, then you have to look at effectively outsmarting rivals. And so they put, for example, in place a wage system which was heavily incentivized, and that was focused on paying players more based on success. So the more goals you score, the more clean sheets you keep, the more wins you achieve, the more you'll get paid. And they introduced that in 2013, and by 2016-17, the team finished in the top four to allow them into the Champions League again. And that very next season, 17-18, they went all the way to the final. And the wage bill rose significantly at that point because the players got into the Champions League. They were winning more, scoring more, keeping more clean sheets. All those bonuses were racking up. And so it became a model based on reward linked to success. But when it comes to then applying that to decisions around recruitment and about managing the squad, it is very much looked at in the round. It's not just about looking at things in isolation where you focus purely on spend and not having to look at investment in the squad that you already have. And that was one of the points that FSG made in 2019, or at least those advocating for FSG made in 2019. So if you recall, in 2019, we won the Champions League, though we came second in the league. And John W. Henry, right at the end of that season, came out and said that we will invest to go one better in the league. And yet our marquee signing was Sepp van den Berg, a young kid from Germany for about 2-3 million. And so after that, we were wondering, well, what's going on here? But the point that was being made by various journalists on behalf of FSG was, well, look, what they're deciding to do is to invest more of the money into retaining these players so that we move from being a stepping stone club to a destination club where players come not to give us 2-3 years and then move to a bigger club, but instead to stay around for longer, to try and win things with us. And certainly there's evidence to suggest that argument holds some merit.
Yeah, but I wanted to ask you, because you look back at that time, how much is also going into that 2020 season where we twatted the league, right? How much of that is also Klopp saying, I have my team, I don't want to mess up the chemistry of this, because now we're going back to the loyalty question, right, that we started the episode with. How much does that go into play on something like that? Like, I have this the way it is. Everybody's in their prime years. Let's run this as much as possible. And ultimately, he did, and now we're seeing the result of the grinding day after day on that kind of style of play that he installed back in 2018, 2019.
Yeah. So look, Steve, the kind of decision making around that time was very much about putting a squad together that can go toe for toe with City. And in 17-18, yes, we got to the Champions League final. In the league itself, the Premier League, we were well behind City. City racked up, I think it was 100 points that season. We achieved 75, if I'm not mistaken, and just about made top four. Even though obviously we got to the Champions League final, we went down to the final day of that season to edge it, and I think Arsenal finished 5th that season. So we went pretty close then. But in the summer of 2018, we brought in some big signings. 18-19, which you then touched on, clearly no real change in terms of the first team squad as such. And, we as fans were worried, but, the club went one better and racked up, in the 1920 season, 99 points and won the league by a mile. And that was with minimal changes to the squad. And so was that Jurgen Klopp feeling, right, I'm happy with the group I have and I don't need any more? I think there's definitely merit to that argument. I think if you look at the squad we had going into 1920, there were players there that you could have looked at and said, well, surely we can upgrade them. I think it's definitely fair to say he was very happy with his first 11. But I think had you said to him, well, look, you've got perhaps a Dejan Lovren, who perhaps was further down the pecking order by that point. Perhaps you could replace him with a younger player who could maybe build up some experience, maybe only play a limited amount of minutes this season, perhaps 2-3 years down the line, that player will be able to be a bit more of a prominent feature in this group. I think had you said that to him, I couldn't see that he would have said no. But I think if he was overly precious about, right, there's 2 or 3 players we definitely need to replace. At that point, because of the success he had by that point, with winning the Champions League, I think he would have got his way. So I think to an extent he was loyal largely to the group he had, and he wasn't overly fussed about replacing certain players, and that's why we ended up doing hardly any business.
Steve, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, if anything, FSG are they always seem to have a plan, right? And you look back, and I think Klopp and FSG, they saw their forward line of Firmino, Mane, and Salah all getting to be 30, and so they started with getting Jota, getting Diaz, then this season Nunez, and then even on the center backs, you're bringing in Konate. But it seems like, in just my opinion, but I feel like he felt like he could go one more year without really investing a lot into the midfield after, not getting too many. In it, I think he just rolled the dice. And do I know some people still are kind of doubt that there's actually money to get Chuchumeni this summer. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, so my understanding is, look, we were very much working on a deal to get both Tchouameni and Nunez at pretty much the same time. These deals don't just happen in the space of 1 or 2 weeks,
right.
Especially with bigger deals. They will take several months. There'll be initial conversations, sounding out agents to say, look, we're interested in your client. Would he be interested in us? If the answer is yes, then there'll be further discussions such as, okay, so potentially what could you offer in terms of pay, accommodation, even help with things like schools for the players' children. What about for, their girlfriend or wife? What, could the club do to support them? So, conversations like that will occur. So the point being, conversations would have been had with the agents, potentially the players themselves, the clubs, to say, look, we are interested. Now, the Tchouameni deal was a lot closer than people realise. We were extremely close to sealing that deal. What then happened was a chain of events which scuppered the deal, starting with Kylian Mbappe deciding not to go to Real Madrid. So he'd given assurances to Real Madrid, and the president of Madrid has gone on record and said, look, we pretty much had his word that he was going to come to us. That's why they reacted furiously, because they felt he'd gone against his word. So he decided, after Qatar / PSG offered Mbappe the world, that, okay, I'm staying at PSG. Madrid, feeling disappointed, felt, okay, we need to then get some big business done. So they went in for Tchouameni. Their focus was obviously Mbappe. And as soon as they went in for Tchouameni, they offered him significantly more than we were able to pay. And on top of that, they also agreed a fee with Monaco, which was significantly higher than we were going to pay. So that deal fell apart. And that's the point at which I, and obviously many other fans, felt, right, now's the time to move on to another target. It would have been great to have signed him. His numbers were great. But we simply didn't do that, as history then showed us. But no, look, these deals were running in parallel pretty much, and there was every intention that we'd get those two players. Those were the players that everyone at the club had agreed were the right place to bring in. Darwin Nunez to evolve our attacking threat and our approach to attack. And then I think the analytics guys at the club perhaps knew something about Fabinho's likely performance levels this season, because they went in for Tchouameni, and Tchouameni is primarily a defensive-minded midfielder. Now, at the time when we were linked to him, I thought, oh, but, Fabinho's world-class. He's one of the best 2 or 3 DMs in the world. Why are we bringing in a player that potentially is threatening his place, is promising a talent as Tchouameni is? But then the evidence of this season suggests, well, maybe some of the underlying data, statistics that the analytics guys have was all pointing in the direction that this would be a season where Fabinho physically would start to struggle and his form would dip. And maybe that is why they were lining him up as a potential successor. So, yeah, the 2 deals were in, well progress, well advanced by the time the Tchouaméni deal fell through. Clearly, we still went ahead with the Nunez deal. But I think any suggestions that, look, it was going to be one or the other, and after the Tchouaméni deal fell through, we then went for Nunez, that's simply not true.
There's something, a dip in form, and then there's another to fall off a cliff in your performance, right? So another thing I don't think they were really prepared that such a drastic reduction of performance levels, in 3 months, right? And not having the ability, obviously injuries to Thiago and didn't help, or Jones at the beginning of the season, Ox, Keita, and I guess when people are talking about FSG and like, hey, why'd you keep Keita and Ox, and sometimes you got to tell people there has to be viable offers from other parties. You can't, and until you do, you just can't let people just go for free.
No, you can't know. And again, we won't know unless players or their agents come out, speak publicly about it, whether there were any offers, or if the offers were anywhere close to the club's valuation. One of the things I have tweeted about, though, is that Liverpool have struggled to sell players at a good premium value. I mean, in the last nearly 5 years after the sale of Coutinho, the club has only managed to sell one player above the value of £25 million, which at the moment is about $29-30 million. And that is Sadio Mane, who we sold to Bayern in the summer. And even then, it wasn't much above that figure. Whereas there are other clubs around us, such as the Chelsea's and Manchester City, that have sold multiple players above that value. Now, why is that? Is that because we haven't looked to sell strong players and look to retain all of our strong players and only move on those that are well down the pecking order? Yes, to an extent that is correct. But at the same time, one of the things that I've been pointing to in my threads is perhaps Klopp being overly loyal. And in my view, the way in which this system can work in an optimal way is that we should know as a club when players are about to get to the end of their peak and look to move those players on at that point in time so that they see out their post-peak years elsewhere and not at Liverpool. And I think that what Klopp is perhaps guilty of is developing this emotional attachment to his players, and especially his most trusted players, to the point that he is struggling to let go. He's almost struggling to accept that, look, this player, he's run his race. He's done now. And I look at somebody like a James Milner. Milner is a consummate professional. We hear so much about what a big figure he is in the dressing room, in pre-season. His performances are great. But he's nearly 37 years of age. And some of the performances we've seen this season, he's been embarrassed. The game against Napoli a few weeks ago was as bad a performance as I've seen from any Liverpool player. And, it's all well and good retaining players because of the sentimentality and whatnot. But football is a cutthroat business. And, it sometimes can be hard for us as fans to see players go, like Gini Wijnaldum when he went back in 2021. He was a big figure for us in midfield. But I still felt it was perhaps the right time to move him on because, in that season leading up to the point of his departure in 2021, we were definitely seeing signs that he was starting to slip. And we'd seen the best of Gini Wijnaldum. And then when he went to PSG, when he did perform, when he did get on the pitch, performed generally very, very poorly, to the point he was dropped. He didn't even make their Champions League squad in the second half of the season. and the club were happy to move him on. And when they brought him in, they were ecstatic. They were delighted to bring him in. They thought they brought in a great player for free, and he was done. So Liverpool was right to move him on at that time, but Liverpool need to be a bit more ruthless, and I think more specifically, Klopp needs to be a bit more ruthless. Though, being blunt, I'm not sure quite if he's got it in him, and that's where arguments have been made that, well, look, should that decision making sit with him? Should it not sit with the sporting director and all the owners?
Yeah, that's always an interesting thing, because what his greatest strength is also his Achilles heel as well, right? Holding on to players, for sentimental value, even having not moved on from Keita, because that was really one of his first big signings, and he wants to make it work. And we all know it's not going to work. I mean, how many times do we have to try to go down that road? And he's probably the most polarizing player on the team, as far as, somebody that's a big name. But, going into the summer, the big question was Mo Salah, right? Are we going to give him the money? And obviously, knowing the finances and just the success of the past few years, the money seems to be there. I mean, we're not, exceeding revenue on any of the wages or anything like that, on operation costs. But I may have been one of the few that said, hey, I'd have been all right selling him at a premium and bringing in 2 or 3 players that are younger and putting our letting Nunez, Jota, Diaz be our new front line and let them have 6 years together like this last 3 did, so that was kind of interesting. I was okay either way on that situation. So
yeah, I mean, with Mo Salah, so second half of last season, his form generally fell off a cliff. First half of the season, he was looking pretty much the best player on the planet. But then AFCON happened, and that tournament just took so much out of him. Perhaps mentally more than physically. I mean, physically, he had a very tough tournament. Game after game that went into extra time. He was playing 120 minutes. The weight and expectation of his entire nation of Egypt on his shoulders. Clearly the star player of that country. And he was not the same player after that, and really struggled. And we were carrying him almost as a passenger. And, we went into the Champions League finals thinking, right, please, come on, Mo. You've struggled, but dig out a performance here for us. And he wasn't able to. I mean, he had his chances, clearly. And Thibaut Courtois had the game of his life, the game of his career. And Mo, on another day, perhaps could have scored 2 or 3, but, he just wasn't able to make it happen. And at that point, he had a year left on his contract, and, there was debates raging on social media. Shall we sell him now? Is he done, or shall we keep him? We ended up keeping him. Could we still sell him next summer? Yes. Yeah. He's 30 years of age, turning 31, in 23. And at that point, he'll still have 2 years or 3 years on his contract. So we should be able to command a good fee for him. Will that go down well with Liverpool fans? Probably not. But if, I don't know, PSG were to pay about £80 million, which is just over $90 million for him, would we turn that down? Probably not, because that could go a long way towards bringing in somebody like a Jude Bellingham or an Enzo Fernandez. Clearly we need investment in midfield. On top of the funds that we are holding, I mean, let's be clear, we generated record levels of revenue in the season just finished a few months ago, and we spent hardly any of that money. So that money is sat there. It is ready to be spent. We will likely spend some of that, I think, in January. I'd be very surprised if we don't bring in at least one player. We know that, and we've seen it before, getting a good, strong signing in January can make a big difference to a club. I mean, Manchester United, going back to 2020, they brought in the January of that 2020, Bruno Fernandes. Now, at that point, they looked completely out of the race for top four. No chance whatsoever, many were predicting. And yet he came in and single-handedly dragged them into the top four places. And they secured Champions League football for the 2021 season. And so, by the same token, if we get the right inspired signing for midfield early in January, they can do for us what Fernandes did for United in that season, which was 1920. So, could Mo go in the summer of next season? Next summer, yes. Should he go? I think that depends on how he performs between now and the remainder of the season. I think if we see an inconsistent Mo, I would advocate that we move him on, because of all of our players, he's probably the one who at that point in time could probably bring in the highest amount of funds for us, other than perhaps a Trent Alexander-Arnold. So on that basis, though, you'd have to be confident as a manager and as an ownership group that, look, we've had our best years out of Mo. He's not got much left. Let him go for a good fee now, and then let's invest those funds into bring in younger, hungrier players that can give us more over the next several years. And that is the way in which this club should operate, and the way in which all clubs should operate. It shouldn't be about clinging on to too many players. And we are now looking at a squad where I think 9 or 10 of our players are 30 years of age or older, and that number would have been even higher had Jurgen Klopp had his way. We know that he wanted to keep Sadio Mane. We know that he wanted to keep Gini Wijnaldum. We know he wanted to keep Adam Lallana and Dejan Lovren. He went on record and said, and the only reason all of these players left was either because of money or because they wanted to be playing more regular first-team football and not just be sat on the bench and coming on to play 15, 20 minutes here or there. But if they were happy to stay and be part of that dressing room, right now, we probably have about 13/14 players 30 years or older, which is crazy.
Yeah, that'd be catastrophic. I mean, you just see the statistics now, just how much our distance covered in games has dropped off precipitously this year, as well as the sprints and high rate pressures or whatever they call it. And just going onto the finance, you had mentioned Jude Bellingham, not having spent a lot of money this summer. Is it just a matter of they're just holding on to the cash for that one player, or is there gonna? I agree with you. I think every January we should be buying somebody. I mean, it's just it injects some energy. I mean, look at Diaz last year for us, right? Yeah, just as profound an impact on us as Bruno Fernandes did for Manchester United, the year before. And I'm of the philosophy that you should bring in somebody fresh every year just to get out of those winter doldrums, as you head into the end of the season. But you think it's just the cash will be there to sign major players?
Absolutely, yes. The only thing that could affect decisions around spend next summer, though, is whether we qualify for the Champions League or not. So if we don't, then the way FSG will look at it is, because as I mentioned before, they're very prudent, they're ultra cautious. So they will start budgeting on not quite a worst case scenario basis, but something closer to that than best case for sure. and then that potentially could cause the club to alter their plans for recruitment in the summer. So, for the sake of argument, if we say, look, a minimum reduction in the midfield squad, we'll see Milner go, Naby Keita go, and Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain go, all of whom have their contracts ending next summer. So if they aren't renewed, certainly 2 of the 3, Oxlade and Keita, I think, virtually certain to be gone. Milner, every season for the last 2 or 3, we thought, right, he's going, and he stayed. I'd be shocked if he stays, but also would it be shocked if he remains, because Klopp loves him. But, that remains to be seen. But say, for sake of argument, 3 are going. We managed to get 1 in this January. We then would like, ideally, to get 2 strong ones in next summer, one of whom could be a Jude Bellingham. But we'd also like to have another strong one as well, somebody like an Enzo Fernandez. Now, he is creating waves already this season, and by the end of the season, his valuation could be all the way up to 80, 90 million pounds. If we make Champions League, we might look to sign him. If we end up in Europa or even outside of those places, we may be looking at, I don't know, a player that's half that value or less. Or we may decide not to recruit at all. So we might just bring in 1 midfielder this summer, 1 in January, and we could lose 3 next summer, or retain Milner. So, those are the possibilities. But based on the season that we just had, 21-22, we generated a lot of money. That money was largely not spent. Net spend, as I've touched on, only £8 million, which is about $9 million. And so the money's still sat there. It's ready to be spent. And I believe that some of it will be spent in January.
Let me ask you a real personal question, Mo. I know Daz is itching to ask you something. How do you reconcile the business side of your personality, and the way FSG runs their business, and with your fan side of like, let's go buy everyone and let's compete with City, and no matter if they're breaking every rule as possible or making up phony companies as sponsors, how do you reconcile that? Because I have a hard time reconciling it on my end too.
It is hard. It is difficult. I mean, you want your club to be able to outspend everyone and bring in the best players, the strongest players, and to have a squad that is the envy of the world. But, look, it was not long ago that we had arguably one of the top 2 or 3 best teams in the entire planet. We got to the Champions League final. We were minutes away from winning the Premier League. We won the FA Cup. We won the League Cup. And so, we did extremely well, 92 points in the Premier League campaign. It was a resounding success. And so, to lose all of that momentum and success and find us in the place we're now in is hard. But at the same time, we achieved that by a group that was not very expensively assembled relative to some of our other rivals across Europe. Our left back cost, £8 million, $9 million. Our right back came through the academy system. We brought in Ibrahima Konate for about £35 million, just over $40 million. Van Dijk obviously was expensive. And then if you look at, our main midfield players last season, our main forwards last season, compared to other players, not for massive sums of money. And yet that squad was as good as any in world football. This season, obviously, far from it. But, the point I'm making is, we don't need to spend, 80, 90, $100 million for every position to have an exceptional squad. And we've proven that, and we've seen that firsthand. It's always about being smart. And I think there's a greater degree of satisfaction to know you've not bought your way to success as well. I think, Manchester City fans are very noisy. They like to give me a lot of stick and really go in for me sometimes on Twitter. But I think a lot of them deep down, as much as they enjoy the success, enjoy the trophy that they won, know that they have bought their way to success. And, some of that will be a bit of a hollow feeling because they know that deep down, and some of them will not even admit to it because they genuinely believe their club has achieved what they have fairly and squarely. But there are others in the City fan base that know that they have really cheated their way to success. And I think, excuse me, that we feel a great amount of pride in the trophies that we've won because we've done it in spite of the tactics employed to get to trophies and silverware employed by others, and we've taken a bit more of an honourable route. That said, if a new ownership group came in that said, look, we want to spend and make Liverpool the premier club in the whole of world football for now and forever, we'd be delighted, I guess. But at the same time, it'd have to be the right kind of group as well. We have seen in the case of Newcastle United, the people that have come in, taken ownership there, and their kind of record on things like human rights and LGBT rights and things like that. So, these things, need to be balanced. It can't necessarily all be about success and nothing else. We need to look at it in a balanced way.
Yeah, does it?
My turn.
Sorry. I get so riled up.
No. You ask good questions, so I'll let you go. So, how do you relieve the fear, Mo, that some Liverpool fans have, all the profits go in FSG's back pocket, and in order for us to buy a player like Bellingham, we've got to sell our prize asset like an Alisson or a Van Dijk or a Mo Salah.
Yeah, so one of the common criticisms has been we're a club that has to sell to buy. And there is an element of truth to that up until more recent years. So if you look at our turnover, up until the point at which we got into the Champions League, we were generating 300 to 360 million pounds. When we got into the Champions League, that increased to 500 million or more, which was 17-18. No, I think 17-18 was just under 500 million, well, there or thereabout. And then 18-19 was 533 million. And then it's hovered just under 500 million because of COVID. And then the season just gone, as I've estimated on Twitter, it should be 580 million pounds or more. And that puts us right at the very, very top when it comes to revenues generated by clubs in world football. So we're at the point now where we don't have to sell to buy. We had to really, at the point at which we were building the squad up to become challengers for the major trophy. So we had to sell Felipe Coutinho in order to bring in Alisson, to bring in Virgil van Dijk, Naby Keita. We're not in that position anymore. But at the same time, if we drop out of the Champions League very quickly, we might find ourselves back into a difficult position of having to potentially sell to buy, and sometimes disposing of players that might be in their prime, not even at the end of their prime. It's like Darwin Núñez, for example. Let's take him. If he settles down, has a strong second half of this season, and then has an exceptional 23-24 season and scores 50 goals, And at that point, his valuation is £200 million. But if we don't make top four for whatever reason, then the club has a big decision to make, which is, do we cash in on our prized asset, Darwin Núñez, for 200 mil? But then use that money to strengthen in several other areas to give ourselves a better chance of breaking back into the top four and to potentially challenge for the league and the Champions League once more. And at that point, the club might think, okay, maybe that is for the greater good, medium to long term. But I'm hopeful that whilst there's still a slim chance that we can qualify for the Champions League, and especially if we do some inspired business in January, that we can still make the Champions League places and ensure that that vital money stream, that revenue stream, is maintained, so we can do good business then next summer, and we can undo the mistakes of the summer gone and arguably the one or two summers preceding that, where, in my view, we should have invested more.
And the whole thing with putting, your eggs all in one basket for like Bellingham, kind of. I mean, this isn't coming from Liverpool Football Club though. It's coming from the media. They've gone with this and they've ran with this all summer. They're still running with it. I believe, still, this if the squad was fully fit, every single player, I think we'd be in a much better position than we are now. Even the likes of Keita and Ox do add depth to this team. And like Klopp has come out and just said, we go again after the World Cup and we will be a different team, which I believe so. But yes, we do need an injection in January. It's obvious, especially midfield. How many players in the next two transfer windows do you think we really need?
Okay, I'll be honest. I think we potentially need about 7.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, I'll explain why. I think midfield clearly is the area we need to strengthen the most, which is where I think, replacing potentially 3 players that will go on a free with 3 newcomers is an obvious one. I then look at our forward line. We have a player who has been a great servant for us over the last few years and who, excuse me, in a few weeks' time can agree a deal with a club outside of England to then go on a free next summer, and that's Firmino. And we're only about 8 weeks away from that point at which he can agree a deal. He still hasn't signed a contract extension with Liverpool. So at this point in time, the most likely scenario is that he won't stay. He is more likely to go. It's very rare that we get to this point in the player's contract and they end up staying. Mm-hmm. So I think he will go. So I think we then need to replace him. What we also then see is that when Mo isn't able to play on the right side of the forward front line, the only alternative to him is Harvey Elliott. And the thing with Harvey is that, he's showing exceptional promise, but one thing we know about him for sure is he isn't the quickest. And if we want to go back to playing this lightning heavy metal football again, somebody with a bit more pace in the way that we see with a Núñez or a Diaz, to then also be able to slot in on the right side might be a bit better for us than Harvey. And the other thing with Harvey is he's very young, so at that age, you're not going to get supreme consistency. So I think Harvey has to be developed. I think Harvey's got a massive future for us. But, one of the things we've already seen this season is he's being played far too much. And, it's very easy to have one average game or poor game followed by a very good one. But when you're trying to rack up 90 odd points to just challenge for the league, these are the differences between winning a title and coming second. So I think we need potentially a player there. It doesn't have to be an expensive signing. But if Mo were to go, then clearly we need to bring in somebody very strong for that side. But if he stays, I instead would advocate bringing in somebody who is quick, who's young, and who in time could potentially develop into a strong replacement for him. And the other reason I'm mentioning this is that we're now seeing this evolution under Klopp, whether it's the right thing to do or not, where we're effectively trying to play 4 forwards in our formation. Now, we've already seen that we've only got 5 established forwards, but 2 of them currently are injured in Jota and Diaz. So we're having to play all 3 of the established ones pretty much every game now. Whereas if you have 6 established forwards and then you throw Carvalho and also Elliott into the mix, you've got 8 to choose from the 4 positions. And if you assume at any one time you've got 1 or 2 out injured, we should obviously hope wouldn't be the case, but if you have, then you still can then rely on 6 to be available and slotting in into those roles. So anyway, 2 forwards, 3 midfielders. When I go back to succession planning, I would be looking at bringing in a left back. And the reason for that is I think that we're getting towards the tail end of Robbo's peak. He's going to turn 29 before the end of the season. He's done a huge amount of minutes over the last 5 seasons, more than near enough anyone in world football. Over the last 18 months, we have started to see greater inconsistency from him. I mean, there are some games where he will play very, very well, and there are other games where he struggles. If you go back to, say, 18, 19, 19, 20, his performance levels were more consistent. So we are seeing that he's now a player in decline. So I would look to be proactive and perhaps move a Tsimikas on, and I think we could get a good fee for him because when he plays for us, he performs well, and then turn Robbo into ultimately the backup to the new player. Or Robbo could still be the lead going into next season, but with a view to the new player coming in, replacing him either during that season or the season after. But they would have to be a step up from Tsimikas. I think Tsimikas is good, and I really like him. He's a good character, but he clearly has a ceiling, and he's not that kind of world-class level that Robbo has been for us. So that's 6. And then the 7th one, I would actually bring in a centre-back. And the reason why is because I look at 2 players in that group of 4 established centre-backs that we have. I'm not counting Nat Phillips amongst them. Those 2 players in Joe Matip and Joe Gomez are injury-prone. And with Gomez, what we see and we have seen over the last few weeks is that, again, he is inconsistent. He is prone to mistakes. And, against Manchester City, he played exceptionally well. And then in the last couple of games in the league, he's performed on the whole pretty poorly. But then Joel Matip, he's 31 now, I think. He generally has been injury prone. He had a very good year last season in terms of avoiding injury. But again, this season, spent a fair amount of time on the sidelines. So either one of those 2, you could say, right, maybe now's the time to move either of them 2 on and bring in a younger centre-back who is physically more resilient and who can be developed into perhaps being the successor to Virgil van Dijk. So, a 21, 22-year-old who, perhaps a couple of years down the line could be the Virgil replacement. And that's about succession planning, which, again, I've tweeted about in the last couple of weeks. Bringing that crop of youngsters in, letting them gradually ease in, learning from the likes of Van Dijk, learning from the likes of Robbo, and then they become our stars for the future.
Ah, you better get that letter into Santa Claus.
Oh, I've already written it.
Like 10 times, yeah.
But other than that, yeah, not asking for much. So.
Not too much. Just at least one player come in. Who I feel really sorry for, though, is Arta. The lads got picked at the last moment, which... How do you think was that a panic buy for us?
So, one of the things we've always heard about Liverpool is we plan, 12 months in advance, 18 months in advance. Yeah. I don't think a year ago that they were planning right. On the deadline day of 2022 summer transfer window, we'll bring in a player from Juventus on loan who is injury prone. No, that was absolutely a panic decision. Jurgen Klopp held his hands up and said, I made a mistake. I think he genuinely felt, right, okay, if Chouameni can't be brought in now, I'll just wait until next year and I'll try and get in Bellingham at that point in time. And, by all accounts, players were presented to him and he was saying, no, they're not as good as Bellingham. So I'll just wait, and I'm happy with what I have. And the big thing that so many fans were complaining about is, look, we have 8 midfielders, but most of them are injury prone. So why does Klopp not want to bring in somebody that can be more of an ever-present, like Gini Wijnaldum was? Yes, there were plenty of times when Gini Wijnaldum would have quiet games, but he was always there. And continuity is something that counts for something in football. One of the things that is a big disruptor is constant changes. You'd sometimes rather have a player that maybe performs at a 7 out of 10 nearly every game, but is always there, than a player that's an 8 or 9 out of 10 that misses half the games. And so that is one of the reasons why I feel I feel that even somebody like bringing in a Thiago went against the model that we've got in place, because if you look at our transfer philosophy, it's about bringing in younger players who in theory should be more resilient to injury. He was an injury prone player. We knew about it from his record at Bayern Munich. He was well above the age profile we normally sign, but we signed him. And when he plays, he's normally really good. The problem is he plays too little. And it affects us because, when he plays, we are very dependent on him as the fulcrum of the team. When he's not there, we just don't look like the same kind of team. And when your team almost psychologically becomes dependent on a player that misses so much and is physically fragile, that is not ideal at all. So, there's plenty for Klopp and co to think about. But yeah, again, for me, it was, Klopp showing loyalty to that group and thinking, right, I've got a really strong group. And he went on record and talked about how complete he thought his midfield group was. Mm-hmm. But, at any one time this season and even in pre-season, we've had 2, 3, 4, 5 injured at any time. How can you build? How can you maintain or achieve consistency with that level of turnover?
I feel yeah. It's a tough watch at the moment, but
Yeah.
again get through to. I think after the World Cup, you're going to see. I mean, it's happening with a lot of other teams. I mean, you see Chelsea have gone out and bought players, and they're up and down. The only team that actually seems to have consistency is City, but is Arsenal. And I look at Arsenal right now; they remind me of us 2-3 seasons ago. Like Arteta seems to have bought really well, and he's, Xhaka I thought was done with Arsenal, was done, with football, and he's changed him. He's the senior player on that team now, has a lot more responsibility. The captaincy was taken from him, and they just seem like a much like together team, like we were when we first started. So yeah, I am a bit jealous of them. They won't win the league, no chance, but it'd still be City's to lose. I'll always say, but I think if we could get a couple more wins in the league up until the World Cup, and then see where we're at in January, bring in another player, I still think top 4 is very obtainable.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
you can never write us off.
No, absolutely not. I mean, if for me, once Konate, that for me has been a massive loss for the team this season, that he's played so few games. If you look back at how he was performing in the second half of last season, almost every game he was a colossus. In the Champions League final, he was immense. I think that, if he starts to get a good run of games together, our defence or defensively will be shoring up quite significantly. And that's clearly been an issue this season, where, so many games we concede first. And when we concede first, straight away we have an uphill task to win. So I think him being back will make a difference. After the World Cup break, we will see Luis Diaz even coming back. And, he, in the opening weeks of the season, I thought was our strongest attacker. I thought he was consistently better than, Mo or even a Firmino. I mean, Firmino obviously has scored a good number of goals. His general all-round play hasn't been the strongest, and sometimes he's been quite frustrating to watch. He's another player that, if you compare his work rate, his all-round play now to around 18, 19, it's a world of difference apart. So he's very much not the same player he used to be. But I agree with you. I think key players coming back, hopefully a strong signing at the beginning of January, and we start to put a good run together. We are absolutely capable of going on a run of 15, 16 games where we win about 14 or 15 of them. And if we achieve that in the second half of the season, I still think we have a good chance of finishing top 4. And if we do that, then we'll say, right, we had a lucky escape. Let's now address the mistakes that we've made over the last 2 to 3 years, get the right quality of players in, move on players that either don't have anything to give or have very little to give, and then challenge once more and take our rightful place up amongst the top 2 in this country, because that's where I think we still belong. That's where I think we should be.
Steve, any last words?
No, we appreciate you, Mo, and we recommend everybody to follow Mo on Twitter and just stay.
Be nice.
And be sane.
Please.
Yeah, get a sane sense of what's happening financially with the FSG and the club, and not just be Klopp out or FSG out without having any kind of context to what you're saying. So we recommend everybody follow you, and we thank you for coming out, Mo. It was great. I mean, the time flew by, and I have a million other questions, but we'll have to save that for another episode.
No, absolutely delighted to come on. Thank you for having me on. And if you're interested in any way in the financial, commercial aspects of Liverpool Football Club, I do try and tweet about such matters on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is @Mo Chatra. And then, Daz, as you touched on, I also podcast for Anfield Index, and I have a podcast that is available for free on there called Money Talks, which I generally put one out once a month, and we will cover all aspects of the business side of football on there. So do give that a listen as well if you can.
All right, appreciate it, Mo, and everyone, thanks for listening again. Always like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Cheers.